First of all, as a child, you don't even realize what you're going through
Yes.
and the mental damage until later on. Then it begins to manifest in various ways. You still carry a lot of insecurities inside of you. After the war, it took a while, for instance, for me to be comfortable with planes flying overhead because each
Yeah.
time planes flew in Biafra, they were dropping bombs. So after the war, when planes would fly overhead, when I was younger, teenager, those years, it was very painful.
Yeah,
It
I
was
can
very
imagine.
painful because
Oh,
each time my father's name came up in any kind of space, I wasn't sure of what kind of reaction I was going to get. So it caused me a lot of insecurity and fears. So that's why I said I carry the story inside of me because these things were there and I realized I had to bring them out.
Welcome to the Diaspora Door podcast, where stories soar and cultures collide. Join us as we journey through vibrant voices and untold tales from around the globe. Let's celebrate the heartbeat of the diaspora together.
hey there, everybody. Hi there, my friends. Welcome to the Diaspora Door. I am your host, Enzi, also known as Inze, also known as Inzanalu, Obinelo, and I am joined today by my co-host, Peter. Chika Odili Okoro. And Peter is an environmentalist. He is founder and CEO of Ecotra, and that is a leading travel company that specializes in top African destinations. Just thought we put a plug in there for Peter's kind of new company that he is heading. We are on WSMN 1590 AM, which is a 95.3 FM, and we are psyched to be here. How are you, Peter, today, this afternoon? You've been so patient waiting for us as we're doing technical wizardry kind
I'm
of thing.
I'm good in there, and thank you. Good morning, and good morning to our listeners at home. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the show.
Okay, great. And as am I. George, our station manager and guru, said that I should make sure everyone sees my fancy, cool pants that I have on today for our special guest who you're going to hear all about. I would like to just give a heads up to our listeners today. Our show today is about the Biafran War. In fact, the actual title of our episode is Before and Beyond the Surrender, Reclaiming the Narrative of the Biafran War. That being said, listeners, as you can imagine, with the word war in there, I just want to give people the heads up that we are going to make references to things like violence and death, the negative results of war, and hence why we're doing the show to remember about the war and how we don't want to go back to those places and think that war is a solution. And I know that's a tall order, especially in today's world where there's a lot of war happening around the world. So I just wanted to give listeners the heads up if people have sensitivities to violence, as many of us do, certainly act accordingly as to how you're going to listen to today's episode. And I will say, we are certainly also going to talk about hopeful moments and successes as we talk about the challenges during the Biafran War. So today, as I said, we're going to be talking about the Biafran War. In particular, we're going to be talking about a great leader who led the Biafran War and led the Biafran people, General Philip Effiong. And we are going to talk about him, his legacy, and honoring him through the eyes of his son, and that is Dr. Philip Effiong Jr. Before I get into introductions of who Dr. Effiong is, I would like to just remind people very quickly about the Nigerian Civil War. I know those of you who have been avid listeners of the Diaspora Door on the radio show and also on our podcast have a little sense of what the Civil War is all about. I do know there are a whole lot of Nigerians out there who have been calling in, sending me texts, wanting to know when the show is going to be because a lot of people want to pay homage to the General Effiong. And many people know about him because, especially Nigerians, because of whether their parents or family members experienced the war and also because being here in the diaspora, there are a lot of questions. And as you can imagine, a lot of people who went through the war, some people, because of trauma, are not so open to sharing details right now. And that's something Philip Effiong Jr. is going to talk to us about. So again, and I'm going to try to be as quick as I can because we've got an hour, and trust me, we would need more than an hour to really absorb all that Philip is going to talk to us about. The Civil War was fought in 1967 to 1970 in Nigeria. That's in West Africa. It was a war that involved three ethnic groups. So the Hausa Fulani in the north of Nigeria, the Yoruba in the west, and the Igbos in the east. The Igbos were persecuted by the rest of Nigeria during the war. The war started after two major bloody coups occurred in the north, and where Igbos were persecuted and slaughtered and killed, and hence Igbos fled to the East region. And when that happened, the Republic of Biafra was created, and the leader, the president of that republic, was the Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu. I know I'm throwing so many words at names, people. And underneath him, his right-hand man, especially with military leadership, was the General Philip Effiong, who we're going to hear a lot about. And he was the first vice president, and he was the first military person during the Biafran War. The Biafran War was one of the first televised famines back in the 60s, because what happened was people were seeing the starvation of children, especially during the Biafran War, and that was televised, and there was an outcry from various countries, humanitarian organizations, churches, who were trying to get supplies into people because the Nigerian government was blockading aid that would have been needed by the Biafran people. So food, medical, water. And this was televised. And to be honest with you, there were many airlifts that were done through the benevolence of certain humanitarian organizations and churches and countries. And these airlifts are today what an organization like Doctors Without Borders, I had not known this until I did reading and people were telling me, is how that organization was formed and what it was replicated from the efforts of all the relief efforts that were done. So that's the Reader's Digest version. Philip Effiong is going to give us more detail. I just wanted to remind people. So Dr. Philip Effiong Jr. has written a book about his father, the General Philip Effiong, and his book is My Biafran Scar, War and Post-War Narrative. And Dr. Effiong is a professor of more than 25 years. He's taught at a number of universities. He got his PhD in drama at the University of Wisconsin. He has taught at the state of Michigan, the university there. He's taught at universities in Nigeria and also in Ghana. He's written a number of articles in the humanities. He's written books, and this most recent book that he wrote came out last year in 2025. You guys, it is a phenomenal book. I have read through all of it. And as you can see, all my sticky notes, my pretty pink post-it notes, I have a zillion questions, Philip, for you. It's a book that everyone should read. And I think it gives a really good overview of what the Biafran War was all about. And especially seen through the eyes of a young boy, because Philip was only 4 or 5 during the war. So seeing the war, seeing Biafra before the war, during the war, and then after, kind of thing. So that being said, it's enough from me. Philip, please welcome. We are so excited to have you on the Diaspora Door. I'm so glad, spoiler alert, that my Uncle Mecca Njoku, put me in contact with you. He was a teenage soldier during the Biafran War. Love him dearly and love him even more for connecting me with you. And thank you for gracing us with your presence. Please, Philip, the first question that we always ask our guests, and then you can dive into the book, is what does diaspora mean to you? Please.
Well, the diaspora for me means the dispersal of our people, and I'm talking of people out of the African continent by choice or against their choices to different parts of the world. We're there in the Middle East, we're there in the Mediterranean, we're there in parts of Asia, like India, we're, of course, in the United States, across the Americas, we're across the Caribbean, and it's about people, being dispersed, like I said, against their choice sometimes, but also by choice. And in the process, we've had and continue to have tremendous impact on the global community through our music, our food, our languages, our fashion, and our cultural practices, as well as our spiritual practices. So that's what the diaspora, in a nutshell, means to me. And I think the most important thing is that we're interconnected, not because of where we are, but where we began,
Exactly.
which is the Africa continent.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you so much. Please, Philip, your PhD is in drama and literature. Your book is about the scars of the Biafran War. Why tell the story of the trauma and healing with the title of Scar rather than just a history kind of thing? Why did you go that way?
Yeah. Well, the story has always been inside of me, and I've always grappled with that experience because it had a tremendous impact on me, both negative and in positive ways as well. And because it's been inside, I realized that I have to bring it out, as a form of healing, as a cathartic experience.
Yes.
But bringing it out was a journey itself, because I would write, I would stop. Sometimes I wouldn't be able to. Sometimes I wouldn't be able to deal with the repressed trauma that was coming out. And I realized that no matter how much I discuss this narrative, that it's always going to be a key part of who I am. And I'm periodically reminded in Nigeria that even though, the war ended and I have a Nigerian passport, many times I am identified with that experience because I do share my father's name. And sometimes the response in Nigeria is positive. People talk about my father as a heroic person. Other people talk about him as a human being who tried to destroy Nigeria by destroying Nigeria's unity. I still face that to this day. That's why the scar is there.
Exactly. Philip, and how do you deal with that other part, the people who feel he destroyed the unity? I mean, when he called that ceasefire, he called it because he didn't want any more killing to occur. So for you who saw your father in such high regard, and still, I'm sure, in high regard as a small child, wow, like when that happened, even how would you have experienced it? How did you feel to know that, oh my goodness, so he called the ceasefire, which is a good thing, and now we are fleeing and having our safety is now a big question. Yeah, how do you do? I can't visualize. I've seen my small children at 4 and 5 who were in, the biggest problem was the field trip they're going to at the pool, and I'm writing out, you're like in mango trees and going through forests and seeing dead bodies. There were times, or seeing people dismembered. How could you deal with people saying my father is this evil person and has done an evil thing? Clearly not.
Yeah, well, first of all, as a child, you don't even realize what you're going through and the mental damage until later on. Then it begins to manifest in various ways. You still carry a lot of insecurities inside of you. After the war, it took a while, for instance, for me to be comfortable with planes flying overhead, because each time planes flew in Biafra, they were dropping bombs. So After the war, when planes would fly overhead, I would cringe. So that's why I said I carry the story inside of me, because these things were there and I realized I had to bring them out. And as a child, you just have to grow fast.
Wow.
You're witnessing death the way you shouldn't witness death. To a large extent, I was quite protected because of my
Yes.
father's status, but still, my grandfather was killed during that war. My cousin was killed. My aunt was killed. Our family home was decimated, destroyed. So you couldn't really escape the destruction. So the pain, just because lives were disrupted, regardless of your status, that is what has affected me for years. As I've grown older and I become more aware of what happened in a way that I wasn't aware as a child, I realized that I have to cope with it by my method is writing. That's people cope with it in various ways. My method is writing. My method is talking about it. My method is making sure that the story stays alive so that those lives would not have been lost in vain. And as far as the insults against my father, growing up, when I was younger, teenager, those years, it was very painful.
Yeah,
It was
I can
very
imagine.
painful because each time my father's name came up in any kind of space, I wasn't sure of what kind of reaction I was going to get. So it caused me a lot of insecurity and fears. But now, I'm a middle-aged man. I'm past a middle-aged man. I'm old enough at some point to be a grandfather. So I am stronger. Those things don't bother me as much, but they still bother me. You can't completely be immune to the pain when people say horrible things about your father.
Exactly. And to tell them all to pound sand. It's remarkable to me that, and you touch about this in the book, because there's some other Biafran leader who his son changed his name. And he was similar to you, had the namesake of his father, who was a leader in the Biafran War. You never changed your name. Can you talk about that? Because, and there were times when, like, there were scholarships and programs, even you, remarkably enough, wanted to get into the military, all of that, once people knew you were, I told you, I read the book from beginning to end. So once they got your name, it's like, oh, no, 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 no. And to me, kudos to your parents, your mom, Josephine, I believe, your mom, how they raised all 7 of you to all have education with the little bit that they did not have. It's 8. Sorry, miss. 8 children that they raised all to have education, even though they didn't have the means after the war to fund such things. So I just wonder, why did you not change it? Why was that not a thought?
No, I have no reason to change my name. I'm not guilty of anything, and
No?
neither was my
Yeah.
father. And if people want to victimize me based on their biases, that's fine. I've realized that my destiny is not in the hands of anyone. It's in the hands of my creator, and it's in the hands of people who care about me, like my wife, my children, relatives, and close friends. And so I really don't care. You have people in Nigeria today who are accused of participating in military dictatorships, of involved in the abuse of power, resources, stealing money, stealing elections, and those people are not apologizing. I have nothing to apologize for. My father never did anything against his country that you can really hold him accountable for. He was in a war situation, and as a military officer, he did what he was supposed to do, which was defend and protect civilians. So I'm not apologizing, and I don't care what the consequences.
Well done.
I'm going to live well. My family is going to live well, and I'm going to be happy. And
beautiful.
I am happy right now.
Beautiful. Listeners, I just want to remind you, you're on the Diaspora Door. I'm your host, Nze Obinelo, my co-host, Peter Okoro, and we are with Dr. Philip Effiong Jr., and we're talking about his book, and that's My Biafran Scar, and a war and post-war narrative. Our episode today on the Diaspora Door is Before and Beyond the Surrender, Reclaiming the Narrative of the Biafran War. Peter, I'm obviously taking over the mic, so I'm going to let you jump in with your questions. Hopefully I won't override and say, oh, I have a question. So you go right ahead, Peter, please.
Yeah, thanks, Nze, for that. Dr. Effiong, it's really a pleasure to have you here and to get to speak to you. Before I go, I would like to give a shout out to the organization here, which I'm from, Igbo Unite, Wisconsin. And
Oh,
before I
okay.
proceed to my questions, I would like to make some wonderful remarks about General Effiong, who was a fine soldier and a
Mm-hmm.
respected statesman in what I would say was the most difficult time in the history of people of the old Eastern region. He stood with courage. He stood with us to the last moment. And I want to state it clearly to those out there listening that his decision to formally end the conflict, the Nigerian-Biafra War in 1970, was not out of defeat, like most people would
Mm-hmm.
say, but to
Yeah.
prevent the extermination of
Yeah.
Igbos and other
Yes.
people of the Eastern region from the encroaching enemy. General Effiong, I read a lot about him growing up, carried himself with quiet strength, guided by duty and gallantry. And irrespective of all adversities, he stood loyal to the Biafran cause and what we
Mhm.
believed in, even up to the last moment. And on January 12th, 1970, when all hope seemed to be lost, General Effiong made a broadcast on Radio Biafra to announce a ceasefire and end to the hostilities. And 3 days later, which was on January 15th, 1970, him and the few comrades left after General Ojukwu had left for Ivory Coast. They went to Dodon Barracks in Lagos to cease fire with the Nigerian government. Now, here goes my questions. So
Thank you
during
for
the
that history, by the way, Peter. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
I
Thank
mean,
you.
like I said, I've read a lot about the Biafran War, and General Effiong was one of the men I admired even up till now. So that's why it was really emotional for me hearing Dr. Effiong speak about the scar. But over to my questions. So during his ceasefire at Dodon Barracks on January 15, 1970, so General Effiong said in his last sentence, and I quote, that the Republic of Biafra hereby ceases to exist. So, Dr. Effiong, do you believe that the Biafran ideology is dead or is currently dead in the minds of Igbos or people of the old Eastern region, 56 years later after the war?
Okay, before I say that, I think you said something fundamental, and that's the fact that he could have prolonged the war. There were
Yeah.
opportunities for guerrilla warfare. We've seen that
Mm-hmm.
all over the African continent, and he
Right,
would not have been the prime victim. The prime victim would have remained children, the
right.
elderly, and civilians. But as far as his announcement, he said that it ceases to exist, and all future arrangements about moving forward has to be done in consultation with our
Consultation.
people.
Right.
Now, the question is, has that happened? Because people feel marginalized.
Marginalized.
People feel like they don't have a say in what's going on. They don't have any control over their resources, which is
Right.
why you have the situation with militia groups
In the
across the
country.
Niger Delta. So, in the minds of a lot of people, the concept, if you want to call it that, or the ideology behind Biafra has to be revisited for the purpose of survival and for the purpose of growth. So I can't say that that shouldn't happen, and I can't deprive people the right to express themselves that way. For me, however, I think that, you see, when you ask me about Biafra, I say the Biafran spirit is within me. I don't
Yes.
necessarily talk about a geographical area. When I say the
Yes.
spirit, I'm talking of the spirit of survival. I'm talking
Yes.
of the spirit of invention.
What they
I'm
believed in.
talking about, yeah, the vision, the spirit of courage. What
Yes.
I think is that a new conversation needs to be had. Because for one, when you talk about the Eastern region, like when you introduced the war, you said that you mentioned the Hausa, the Yoruba,
Yes.
and the Igbo, but the rest of us were also equally involved. So
Exactly.
a lot of the conversation about Biafra has to extend to involving people who are not the Igbo people, because you can't create Biafra out of the eastern region when you have a significant number of people saying, we're not sure if we want to be a part of this. So I think there should be greater
Conversations on
and
that.
greater conversation that, and reminds us that we're all in the same struggles. It doesn't matter where you're from. If you're a student who doesn't have access to good education, if you've been without a job for years, it doesn't matter whether you're Izo or you're Efik or you're Igbo, your struggle is the same. So we have to find that kind of camaraderie and seek more how to cooperate with each other before we even talk about creating an ideology or a vision that's similar to Biafra.
Yeah.
But how do we do that? How do we do that, Philip? Like, that's the big crux, right?
And another thing, right? I like, as you mentioned, like you talked about the conversation, the wider minorities around, also in a follow-up question to what Nze asked. Now, let me take you back to history again, which would help you better answer our question. So on May 27, 1967, that was 3 days before Ojukwu declared Biafra. Yakubu Gowon created 12 states in Nigeria.
That's right.
And this split the old eastern region into three. So they had what they called the East Central State, the Rivers and Cross River State. Now the aim of this state creation, Southeastern. Yes, thank you for that correction. Yeah. So the aim of this state creation was to weaken the Eastern region, to divide and conquer. Now subsequent heads of state, as you know, created additional states into what we have today as Southeast and South-South. Now, with this division and identity crisis currently rocking the old Eastern region, what would you say is the best way that the old Eastern region can reunite? Because today you hear some people, you hear a Chukwuma from Ikwere tell you that he's not Igbo. You hear a Chinonso from Anyoma tell you that they are not Igbo. So now this divide and conquer, what do you think we can better do to reunite our people of the old Eastern region?
One of the things I've tried to do whenever I have conversations about this issue is I talk about education, but proactive, practical education to restore what we were. Because when you talk about Ikwere people, you talk about Ukwani people, which is what my mother was, or Anyocha people, and you talk about the Ibibio people, the Efik. We've always had a strong collaboration culturally and linguistically. If you look at the Eastern women's uprising against colonialism, it involved every woman you have monuments built to those women in places like Ikorabasi. So you had Ikwere women, Igbo women, Efik women, Ibibio women, you had Opobo women. That was how we originally were. The creation of states is a very bad thing. The creation of states has created rigid boundaries. If the boundaries were fluid, I would understand, but we've become more territorial. Otherwise, if you go into the history, you find that we're very, very interconnected. You look at some Igbo practices, like the Igbo people who have the Igbo society, which my people have. There's a form of symbolic writing called Nsibidi, which Igbo people have, which Efik people have, Ibibio people have, So we have to restore that by going back to education. History has been a problem in Nigeria. And I hear that it was even banned from schools.
It was banned, It's been banned. It was banned after the war.
That's crazy.
If I had the opportunity to be an educator, and believe it or not, even though I'm in Michigan, I crave being an educator in Nigeria. That's a different conversation. But one of the things I would do would promote the restoration of the interconnections between our people. Because if it was there in the past, there's no reason why it can't exist today, But we've become increasingly territorial, but we don't have to allow those boundaries to continue to divide us. Because in the end, we have our state, we had Southeastern State, which became Cross River. Now we have Akwa Ibom and Cross River. But our people should understand that having a state doesn't mean you are autonomous. You don't have any control over your resources. You go to our states, there's nothing to show for our oil wealth. So that kind of re-education of, getting to the minds of our people that way, I think it would really help. I really believe it.
Thank you so much for that, Dr.
Mm,
Effiong. The reason why
mm,
I asked that question is in particular is that your book is the Biafran scar and the impact it had on you, your family, and your community. I feel like
mm.
the division is one of the major scars that the Civil
Yeah,
War had
yeah.
on us. And I mean, you gave a lot of interesting insights that really, really, shaped my mind in a lot of things. So one other question I was going to ask, Nze, before I pass it over to you
No
was
problem. No problem.
in Nigeria today, when you look at the current happenings from terrorism and extremism to corruption to nepotism and obvious marginalization of Igbos and people from the Delta areas, which you already mentioned earlier on. Now, when you look at all these happenings in Nigeria today, do you believe that General Ojukwu and General Effiong's struggle and fight, do you think that they've been vindicated by that? Because a
Mm.
lot of people always say, yeah, Ojukwu definitely saw the future. General Effiong definitely
Yeah.
saw the future. So when you look at what our people are going through today in Nigeria, do you think they are vindicated?
I think they're vindicated at least to an extent because one of the goals of the Biafran effort was to establish more autonomy
Yeah,
for the people so that you have greater control over your resources. And
resources.
that's
Yeah,
exactly what people are talking about today.
right.
People might question the method, and, argue over the strategies and all of that. That's fine. But the key vision was people should take back control of what
Yes.
belongs to them.
To them. Yeah.
And that is not happening. And so you across Nigeria today, the violence you talk about, you cannot separate that from the war experience because the war, basically the message of the war was if you want something, you take it by force,
Yes.
you use
Yes.
violence. And that is the philosophy that remains
Yep.
with a lot of people today, whether it's religiously or politically, you want something, you take it through violence.
Yes.
There
Violence.
was
Yeah.
never an effort to address what was wrong with that philosophy. And
Right.
so, because that philosophy was embraced and, it was a winner take all type of message, that's what people are still endorsing and are
Yes.
subscribing to. It is directly connected to the war.
Yes.
When you normalize violence and you do nothing about normalizing violence, violence stays normalized. So all the problems, when people talk about violence across the country, it's unfortunate, but to me, it's not surprising. So yes, there's a degree of vindication, especially when you look at the fact that the war was supposed to be about unity, but a lot of the people that have been butchered in
Yes.
the Middle Belt have been butchered by people who fought on the same side with
Yeah.
them.
Most of the people from the Middle Belt fought against us in the war.
That's
Mm-hmm.
right.
Mm-hmm.
We are not doing the killings, so what
Yes.
kind of unity did you fight for?
Right. Right. And it's also very interesting, that it happens to be that, although we don't know, we could say it's the coincidence, but when you look at today, you see that most of the people who fought on the Biafran side happen to be all gone, and most of the generals who fought on the Nigerian side happen to be still alive today. So,
Yes.
can we, as Christians, could we say this is nature played out? I mean, if you can see, General Gowon is still alive today, and most of his people are massacred in
Mm-hmm.
the Nigeria that was fought for. So
It's
that was
sad.
that was where my question came from, the vindication
Yeah.
aspect. Because a lot of people would always ask that question. But yeah, this were really Nze, you can go ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
those
you.
points, Dr. Effiong.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Philip, and thank you, Peter. Philip, please, I want to go back a little because I'm just marveled how your family survived all through the war. I just want to go back to when you were doing your research and, you saw after the war, your dad, I mean, he was a man of high esteem, and
Mhm.
held a high title. And then after the war, he's trying to find safety for all of you, somewhat asking or begging people to keep, you safe and keep your mom safe. You guys were in Ireland. You and your brother were in Ireland, and your siblings were in Ireland for a little time.
Mhm.
In
After the war.
after,
After the
sorry,
war.
after the war, after the war. Yes, after the war. Please, can you talk a little bit about why your dad didn't just, Ojukwu was in Ivory Coast, why your dad didn't go, because he had connections, obviously, in Ireland. I saw in the book,
Mhm.
a few years ago, you met up with the family that you stayed with. I think the Murphys, not
Mhm.
positive their name.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyhow,
Mhm.
that you you and your brother stayed with. Just wondering why your dad didn't leave Nigeria and just
Mhm.
say, hey, you know what? I'm done. And I'm just going to go overseas and raise my family in safety overseas.
I'll answer that question, but I just want to go back briefly
Thank you.
to
Yes.
what Peter had said.
Yes.
The Middle Belt is a tragic story for me
Hmm.
because, and it's unfortunate, like you said, it's as if, that this is some kind of prophetic result of violence. The Middle Belt soldiers probably won that war because
Yeah,
the
they
leader
did.
of
They did.
Nigeria was
Yeah.
was from the Middle Belt. A lot of my mother's friends were from the Middle Belt. She went to school with a lot of them, a lot of my friends, and I,
I love the
the
Nigerian
Middle
soldiers
Belt.
too.
Yeah, a lot of Middle Belt people are dear to me. So I hear what you say, and I agree with you, but I'm also thinking, if we, it would also be good to express hope that we can find some kind of restoration so that
Yeah.
this, people stop suffering anywhere
Yeah.
in Nigeria. I just wanted to put out there. But as
Thank
far
you.
as my dad,
Thank you.
not leaving, he had the opportunity, and
Yeah.
people don't realize that. But I don't think it was I think he just wanted it to end. My father was a professional soldier. He was not
Yes.
a lawyer
Absolutely.
in the army. He was not an accountant in the army. And he joined the army, for peacekeeping and to also protect the nation. It was not his goal. And even though he fought, he had a responsibility in Biafra, but he hated the fact that we ended up fighting ourselves, and he was looking for every opportunity to see this come to an end. That is why he opted not to go anywhere, and he believed that as the new head of state, he believed that he could facilitate an end to the war. Unfortunately, that's what happened. Yeah,
And
so it was
it took
really
a
just.
yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, I said it took a tremendous amount of courage for him to go to the Northern Barracks because I mean he could have been
Yeah.
arrested, he could have been killed, you
Oh,
know.
absolutely.
So I mean, for him to have gone there, irrespective of how like, oh, you're fine, you can come, nothing
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
gonna happen. But for him to go in there, that was the mind of a brave soldier. And people don't talk about it enough, but I think General
Yeah.
Effiong deserved so much courage for the
Totally.
role he played
Yeah.
in the war.
Totally.
No,
He
when he
did.
went, you're absolutely right that he had neither him, though, the Mbanefo, who was the Chief Justice of Biafra, and others that went with him, they did not know
Yeah,
what would be their fate. They didn't know.
yeah,
They didn't know whether they would be, jailed, executed. There was absolutely no knowledge
yes,
of what would happen to them. We're happy that they weren't executed. But it also
yeah,
goes back to my what I said earlier about changing my name. If they could find something guilty, that he was guilty of anything, sure, punish him.
Yeah.
I think part of it was the fact that they couldn't find any real crime that he had committed. And the international community was paying attention and
yeah,
was also criticizing a lot of human rights abuse in Biafra. So I think
right,
that may have also been a factor, pressure from the international community as well.
right, right, right.
Philip, please, how did you and your siblings keep cohesive and connected during, number one, during the war, then after the war, especially when your sisters were in Ireland and they stayed
Mhm.
even longer than you and your brother, because you and your brother
Mhm.
came back. How
Mhm.
did it appears, you have a healthy relationship. I know one of your brothers, maybe it's
Nice.
Francis, who
No,
some
no.
Charles.
You mean who passed or who?
Charles, who the trauma came up as he
No, that's
was.
Francis. That's
Okay,
Francis.
Francis.
That's
Trauma
Francis, yeah.
came up as he, and understandably so. That I mean, a small child would
Mhm.
have that sort of trauma coming up because you're saying your. It sounds from the book that your trauma came maybe later
Yeah.
in
Mhm.
life, and it came earlier with him. How did you kids keep it together? Because when I look at the pictures or hear the stories, again, I don't know if it's because you felt protected and whatnot. It, at least as children, I didn't get a sense of doom and gloom. You were still
Yeah.
trying to be kids during the war.
Yeah, absolutely. And the trauma has always been there. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that you don't realize it because in war situations, you try to create normalcy in the
Yeah.
midst of so much death and
Yeah.
tragedy. I mean, people were still trying to live normal lives. People were getting married, falling in love, and things like that. But for me, but trauma also affects people differently.
Differently.
And my brother was younger than me, and I think that was part of, he was not more than a toddler. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it affected him differently because if the planes came to bomb, someone had to pick him up and run with him
Yeah.
to find
Oh,
shelter. And he didn't
oh,
understand what was going on. You know, usually when he was picked up, it was for someone to play with him, but someone is picking him up and screaming. So you don't know what it's doing to him mentally. And sometimes when we even ran, when the planes came, he would forget him because he would just be
oh,
sitting down there and someone would remember and go back and pick up
oh,
Francis. And by the way, I was 6 when the
oh,
war.
6.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Wow.
I was 6 when the war started. So and I was a little more alert than maybe a 6-year-old because of the situation.
Correct. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the trauma was that it didn't affect me like my brother. You know, it affected him, his education and everything. But separation, you know, going back to your question about keeping the family together, how did I still feel bonded with my siblings? At some point, survival took precedence over family unity. So we knew that
Okay.
my sisters were being taken away. Quite a number of Biafran children were airlifted to the Ivory Coast, Gabon, and
Gabon.
then
Yeah.
the Holy Ghost Fathers would take some of them to Ireland. That
Mm.
the Holy Ghost Fathers is like a Catholic organization. So that's how
Yes.
my sisters went there. Then my older brother, who's now late, went a couple of months later.
That's Charles. Is
Then
that Charles?
no, that's Valentine.
Thank you.
That's
Okay.
Valentine. It's Charles and myself
Okay.
and my mother and a cousin and Francis that left about 2-3 days before the war ended. You know, we were getting on cargo planes and we left, but it was all about survival, not about family unity.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually Charles and I from the Ivory Coast were taken to Ireland, where we reunited with our older siblings. And then we came back, like you rightly pointed out, before them. The fact that we knew that people were okay was enough.
Okay.
And so eventually physically we all came together.
Yeah.
But the knowledge that people were fine was more important than being together in the same house. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes. Of course.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. It does. Yeah.
So that was
As
part of survival. Sorry, go ahead.
no, thank you. Thank you. And I'm just looking at the time because I don't want to cut us off. We have about 10 minutes left. I just wonder, please, your safety now the war is over. How were you conscious of the fact that your family wasn't always safe after the war, or was that just something you just ignored? That, like, how do you deal with not knowing, uncertainty, and you weren't seeing your dad often? It's not like he's there all the time to talk to. So how do you, that uncertainty and just security and safety, how did you deal, you and your siblings deal with that? And your mom too, I can imagine. Where's my husband?
And also, were you
Yeah.
guys at the bunker? Just like if an addition to hers, were you at the Ojuku's bunker during the war?
No, we're
Okay.
not. We didn't have anything to do with that. I hear about it, but we didn't have anything
Okay.
to do with that.
But you were
as
in
far as
bunkers. But you were in bunkers. I do remember
no,
reading.
we would run into makeshift bunkers. There were really holes in the ground,
Hmm.
Okay.
covered with sand, and
Mm,
with holes on the side, and you went
Yeah.
in there. That was it. They were really just sand
unbelievable.
or mud
Unbelievable.
bunkers. Yeah, but if a bomb landed on any of them, it would have
Yeah.
killed everybody inside.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But anyway, the as far as the uncertainty, the only uncertainty for us was, would we have food tomorrow? Would there be money to send someone to school, pay
Yeah.
school fees? That was the uncertainty, because we were conscious of the fact that our parents didn't have a means of livelihood. My father had been removed from the army and didn't receive any kind of benefits.
That's sad.
My
Crazy.
mother,
Crazy.
yeah,
Crazy.
my
Unfortunate.
mother was more of the businesswoman, because she was
Hmm.
raised by a business mother. So even though she was a teacher, she knew that teaching would not bring in anything. So she went into business. She used to sew, she used to sell all kinds
Yeah.
of things from the house. And occasionally she'd get a contract with maybe the teaching hospital in Enugu to sew nurses' uniforms. So she used to do on the spur of the moment business that would bring in money right away. My father was the one who would travel
Yeah.
for weeks or months at a time. And this, if you think about it, the dynamics between both of them was different, because my father, since the 50s, was used to being in a supervisory position
Yes.
as a
Yeah.
military officer. So to get to that point where you now have to go and solicit help psychologically was not easy for him. Yeah,
Not
but
at all.
my mother just rolled up her sleeves and did whatever she needed to do. So this actually introduces a good aspect of this story. At some point, we need to pay more attention to the women during the war and after the war, and their role in helping families survive.
Yeah.
Because I think many times that narrative is not addressed with the importance that it deserves.
Yeah, and
And you spoke of
Umibo,
that. You
yes, and
spoke of
Umibo Unite.
sheroes. You spoke of
Mhm.
sheroes. Sorry,
Yeah.
Peter, go
No,
ahead.
no,
Sorry.
no, you're good. Yeah, I was just going to
Yeah.
mention what Dr. Effiong said mentioned last. I mean, regarding women and their experiences in the war, UIU Wisconsin, that is Umibo Unite Wisconsin chapter, will be having an event, a Biafra Remembrance Day event at the end of this month, May 30th, and they'll be talking on that. But just the
Mhm.
final question I have for you, Dr. Effiong, is hearing that your dad, General Effiong, didn't get any benefit leaving the army,
None.
which is a
None.
very
None.
unfortunate
Nothing.
situation. What was it like? Now, I know your dad, the general, lived a low profile life till when he passed
Mhm.
on. What was his thoughts about Nigeria for the rest of his life? What was his life like? Because we never really saw anything,
Mhm.
we never really saw much about him in the media or anything before he passed on.
And you guys, we've
I
got
think
5 minutes so that we don't cut
okay.
people
Yeah,
off
sure.
abruptly.
Okay. I think to understand his what he thought about Nigeria is the life he had lived. My
Yeah,
father was a self-educated person who became one of the first officers in the army
yeah,
and served diligently. There's nowhere in sometimes what you do for your country is what you don't do. My
yes,
father never stole money, he never
right.
engaged in any of these corrupt practices. He never participated in a coup or anything like that. All the things we accuse leaders of doing
Yes.
wrong to Nigeria, he
Right.
never did. So he still had, his
Integrity.
hopes was, yeah, his hopes was for the survival of the people, for the
The common man.
progress
Yeah.
of the nation. Yeah, whether the nation was defined as Biafra or Nigeria, that was
Okay.
what his vision was
Till the
for the
end.
people. Yeah, till the
Thank
end.
you.
Great.
Thank
Great.
you, Phil. So, Philip, please, a book recommendation for you before we wrap up. And thank you so very much for this time. We have to totally have you back. Like I said, 52 minutes is not enough time.
Mhm.
Yeah, what book would you recommend other than your own book, which I'm recommending everyone,
Yes, everyone get
everyone.
his book. Everyone get
Yeah,
his
my
book.
Biafran Scar, a war
Yeah.
post-war narrative is excellent. Yeah, everyone needs to read it.
I would actually recommend a book that's fiction,
Okay.
written by a brilliant, brilliant writer who I was introduced to recently called Chigozie Obioma. And he wrote a book called The Road to the Country. It is a fascinating fictional account of the war by someone who's a post-war generation writer.
Wow.
It is so comprehensive and so unique. He tells that story through the eyes of a Yoruba student, university student,
Wow.
which is, yes, he
Interesting.
does that. And then he introduces something that we don't see in many of these books, and that is the significance of the spiritual practices of our people and how they informed how people related to the war or the direction of the war. It is, I wish I could say more. I've actually written an article of that about that
Wow.
book. It should be published later this
Okay.
this year. So Chigozie Obioma, The Road to the Country. And
The
if
Road
you,
to the Country.
Chigozie, are listening to me, you owe me big time because you didn't ask me to do this. You didn't ask me to do this.
Nice. That is beautiful. That's beautiful. Dr. Effiong, thank you
Thank
so
you so much.
very much. This
Thanks,
is
Dr.
incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the
Thank you.
time being with us. Definitely, we
Thank
will
you.
have you back. I know Peter and his group, Igbo Unite, are looking to have you speak or
Absolutely.
dial in. I think it's phenomenal. You're an incredible soul. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you for having
because
me here.
no, our pleasure, and the opportunity. Because again, just the scar, the trauma. I can't imagine what you went through as you're putting this book together. It's
Yeah.
phenomenal. So
Thank you.
again, listeners, thank you for being with us on the Diaspora Door. I'm your host, Inze Obinelo. It's great being here. We've enjoyed the time with Dr. Philip Effiong Jr. as he recalled his life during the war, before the war, and honoring the legacy of his father, General Philip Effiong, which, as Peter Okoro, my co-host, has said, a hero and needs to be recognized as a hero. So again, thank you for being here on WSMN, 1590 AM, 95.3 FM. We look forward to seeing you back on the Diaspora Door. Take care, my friends. Bye. Thank you.
The Diaspora Door podcast is brought to you by Nze Obinelo and Anthony Daniel and produced by Soundproof Audios. Distributed on Spotify and our website at www.diasporadoor.com. Executively produced by Nze Obinelo. Music mixing and mastering by Anthony Daniel. Signing out. See you next time.